Hello.
Hello.
Thanks for taking some time to sit with me. I'm really excited to talk about your exhibition and kind of be on the other side of it. You know, we talked about this for a year, basically, leading up to your first solo exhibition. And now it's here. And I feel like this is a great opportunity to reflect on it and kind of take a breath and see what your feelings are on the other side. So, yeah.
Yes, thank you for having me. I feel like we've been on this journey together and you've seen the work from when it was a baby.
Yeah.
And I think through a lot of our conversations, it's grown and it's really shaped the way it's sort of developed. So I'm really happy that you're here to see the show and talk about it with you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, me too. So I'd love for you to just kind of introduce the show, sort of top down, like tell people like, you know, what's the name, what are the themes, and then we can kind of dive into what was your process in getting here.
The name of the show is Resonant Abstractions. Why did you think of Resonant Abstractions? Because when I heard it, I was like, that's perfect.
Yeah. Well, I think I'm a little bit cheesy sometimes. And what I mean when I name shows and what is that is like, I love a word that has a double meaning. I love a word that you can double dip in the exhibition for a show. So resonant can have, of course, the meaning, like a sound meaning. And as we'll get into, there's a real sound element in this exhibition. So for something to resonate, to, you know, to actually move out into space, that's what sound vibrations do. But then it can also mean land and be meaningful in somebody, within someone. And so I liked that word because it had, you know, both an emotional meaning in terms of how artwork hits people and is perceived by people. And it also has the element of sound as well. And also this sort of technical idea in the sound, you know, resonant is actually like the vibrations in it. And the sounds in this show, they have a kind of functionality to them. I felt that they weren't necessarily serving the purpose to just be a beautiful noise, right? It wasn't like a pop song or something that like it's supposed to hit you and you're supposed to hum along. They had kind of a functionality quality and a didactic quality to them. And so I liked that word as it related to the sound quality. And then of course, abstractions, you know, the work is abstract, but it's also abstracted from larger ideas around language and communication. So anytime I can double, triple dip on words and naming an exhibition, I like to do that.
I love hearing your thoughts on this because when I heard it, I thought about the resonance that could happen, but also I really liked the idea of resonant abstractions because I think, you know, the work is about language and we're taking context and bias out of it. So what's left is essentially resonance or like remnants of things, of lines that used to be consonants and vowels. And I loved how you thought of resonant abstractions together because it's sort of, like you said, a lot of double dipping on a lot of different layers. And also when we leave the exhibition, when we go out of the space, you can still hear the sound. So I thought that the name that you came up with was really clever because it not only alluded to the work, but also the experience of the show itself.
Oh, I love that too. Yeah, that idea that you kind of take it with you as you leave. And, you know, it's fun to be able to have this conversation. We're actually, you know, physically in between the two sides of the show and you can hear the sounds coming in and out. So it's sort of like it's resonating across us as we're having the chat. Yeah.
And I think that's why, like, when you said it, I immediately was like, yes, that's it. And I think, you know, going back into what the work is about, this work is sort of, it was built on language first. And when we first met, we talked a lot about what language means and what language means to the individual and how that could sort of shape the individual's perspective and their things like that. And then from there, I think we really just delved into abstracting it and taking literally the context out of what language is and sort of rearranging and focusing on the process of it, which I really adored. And I really loved that you really encouraged me to really sink into the process rather than the big question of what language is. And I think that's why the work is so heavily process-based. And I think that's also why, with the help of your exhibition design, it became sort of experiential sort of feeling.
Yeah. I remember we were talking about how like creation and analysis are two separate processes, right?
Exactly.
And, as you were exploring these ideas, I really admired the way you were balancing these aesthetic concerns, because, the work is just really beautiful, and you have pieces that have really sophisticated compositions in terms of their balance, their use of space, the exposed canvas. But then on top of that, you're also dealing with larger ideas like around linguistics and communication. Why was that the topic of your first solo exhibition?
I think I've always been very fascinated with language because of how it shapes memory. The reason why I started painting in the first place is because I took care of my grandmother for a year during COVID, and the only activity that we sort of bonded over, something that she could do that would not only help with her brain, but also with like her tactileness, was finger painting. My grandmother has Alzheimer's, as you know, and I realized that there was this link between memory and painting, and I was really, really curious about it. I've never painted before. I graduated photography, so I've never really delved into it. And from there, I sort of delved into memory and the idea of it. And then from there, it was language and as our conversations. And I think we got to know each other, and you mentioned and you shared that your mother also suffered with dementia as well. And I think we really talked about how language shapes that and how memory is lost and gained. And I think that inspired a lot of these ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. That was those were some really special conversations, because I think that the experience of losing someone to dementia is someone that you love is so unlike anything else in the world. And it sort of seems like, either you've lived it or you haven't, It's very bittersweet, but it's also so informative. And I feel like for me, it gives me such a sense of gratitude for, being in a healthy body with a healthy brain, being able to use language in the way that I can at this point as well. And that's the other side of that coin, is that can be a gift. So in terms of how, these conversations shaped the physical output, I feel like you had a really interesting process in terms of creating essentially a language for the paintings. Can you speak to that a little bit?
I'm someone who sort of associates sounds with colors anyways. So sort of delving back into a specific memory, bringing that out, painting the sounds that I hear, and then finding a way to translate that into MIDI. I wanted to have like a direct translation of it, because I think of it as a book. When you're reading something, you see the letter A, the letter B, you hear it as well in your head. And I wanted that sort of same thing to happen. And from there, I decided to put it through that and have the screens, because we were talking about this with you and your husband, Tim. And he said that, it would be so interesting to have sort of that bridge between the two. And I was like, you're right. It would be like reading a book. And from there, we translate it into the screens. And I think it's really important to mention the screens, because I think we're moving from like right now, from our age to now, where most of our things that we sort of consume, it's no longer through pages, but through screens. So to have that medium is really important.
The experience of hearing the MIDI while seeing the MIDI, I think really brings it together.
So the process of translating the visual blocks into auditorial blocks in MIDI is, as you can see from here, I carefully select each color and I work by color, and then I place it specifically on each one through a series of mathematical calculations so that it's accurate. And if you keep on scrolling, you can see that each color has a certain octave, has a certain scale, and everything is actually on a major pentatonic scale. Because I believe that by incorporating the idea of culture into the work and how culture affects bias and language, I think it's really important, and I think it's something that is sort of seamlessly integrated together. You'll see that each block is being played by a series of notes. And so this program is called Logic Pro, and this is sort of a music making program, which is why you can hear all these notes, and then each series of colors has its own sound and a specific tone and, yes, octave to it. Also, I think something important to note is that each piece, depending on the way that I experience the sound or the way that I feel like the sound moves with me, has a specific beat. So, for example, this one is at 120, while others might be at 80, while others might be at like 60 or something like that.
So when you were creating the painting, were you thinking about the audio product on the other side of it? Or were you creating the paintings, you know, just as a painting in and of itself standing alone, and then the MIDI on the other side of it is like a reactive sort of almost byproduct of the painting?
I think it went simultaneously. As I paint, I hear the sound. So yes, it was a very parallel sort of process. I didn't really think about it at first until the second part of it, where I had to do like a direct translation, where I realized that those sounds were also like, they all had different sort of varying. You know, I think when we talk about language, taking context and bias out of it, we have to talk about how culture influences that. And I wanted to bring that into the work by having all of the pieces be on a pentatonic scale, which is actually used in a lot of Asian music, because I wanted auditorily to sort of incorporate that too.
You know, as someone who's multilingual, how do you find that the language shapes your cognitive constructions of concepts?
You know, through language, we are sort of passed on these ideas and ideals from the cultures that we learn. And I think that by knowing different languages, I'm able to sort of learn the ideals behind them, which I think is really interesting, because that ultimately shapes my perspective on everything. I like the idea of calling it multifaceted. And I think the more language you learn, it's like you're listening to different people's opinions. And I think it's so important to listen. And I think that the more you know, the more you sort of have different things to like weigh on, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. One of the things that I think is so wonderful about acquiring other languages throughout one's life is it truly is a structure with which to think about the world that you're gaining access to. You know, I think sometimes literally through, there might be a concept that there's a word for in that language that doesn't exist. But then I think also, as you say, in the actual structure of the language as well, you know, like the way ideas are formed, you know, not just this literal, oh, that's a new noun I didn't have before, but the way ideas are conceived, the way certain elements of a culture might be really privileged in a language. Like there's so much. For instance, in Thai, one of the wonderful things about it is there's so much food talk.
Really?
You know,
I never noticed.
I think that there's a lot of, you know, of like being able to greet someone with like, you know, have you eaten, you know, essentially is like, it's just as a form of greeting, which is something you don't have in language and has a social element as well. And so, you know, that then kind of creates a different way of thinking about the world. For you, when you're making these pieces, you know, you'll see some of them have this extremely tight composition, you know, where there's hardly any negative space. Some of them have a lot of exposed canvas. They're very open. Some of them feel a little bit more static and secure. Some of them have a lot of movement in them. Tell me about the different compositions. You know, why does one piece need to be filled? Why is one piece sort of falling bricks? What is the need in the different pieces?
I think of the pieces sort of like conversations and sounds. And I think that, you know, when we're really excited about something, we tend to talk a lot and we're very excited. It's very bold, very bright, very vibrant. And there are some like conversations we have where it's more quiet and it's more subdued. And I think I was trying to mimic a lot of sort of speech patterns in the way we talk. I think because the work is based on sound within memory, those sounds are varying in lengths and loudness and all of those things. And I wanted to find a way to visually depict that.
So you've had your first solo exhibition. I think it's a beautiful success. It's an amazing show. I'm really excited for people to come see it and get to know you as a young emerging artist. Do you think that this is going to be something that you want to continue to work on? Do you think that your second solo show will be this? When you get back in the studio, does this feel like something that still has a lot left in you? Or do you feel like maybe your practice might take a slightly different direction?
The idea of language has always fascinated me, because I think if we were to change something, we would have to start with language. And I think it's so important. And because of that, I think there's so much left to talk about and to say and to explore. Honestly, I think my whole career will be about language. And I think that there's so many things that I haven't tapped into yet. For example, body language, or like tonality in terms of like inflections and things like that. And I'm really, really excited to go back in and think about that. Perhaps instead of canvases, it'll be sculptures next time. If given the opportunity, I would love to make more work about, yes, the process of it, but the effects of it as well. And I think that would be really interesting, to hold space for sort of what happens when language can, I think, rebuild and destroy things. What happens during that process? And I think that is something I'm really excited to tackle, hopefully.
Wow, that sounds incredible. And so it's been such a pleasure and an honor working with you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think, truly, our conversations have really shaped the work, and you have been so generous with your time and sharing so many of your experiences. So I thank you as well. And also the exhibition design.
Yeah.
It's all you.
Well, that's the job of the curator. So you can just make wonderful pieces for us to enjoy, and then we get to take over and hopefully make the rest of it easy. So it's been really wonderful working with you. I'm so excited to see where you go from here. And it's been an honor to share your work with everyone here, the audience of SAC Gallery and Bangkok and the world more broadly.
Thank you. Thank you so much.